This tutorial is for Clue 6 of the Brilliance pattern, which is the Expression Fiber Arts 2024 Mystery Knit Along pattern. At the beginning of the video, I'm going to be demonstrating some bobbins and how to use them. And as usual, there's timestamps in the video description, so you can jump to whichever part you'd like to watch, and you can skip all the rest. So let's get started.
Let's talk about bobbins. Exhibit A through H or so. All right. So what I have here is just a selection of store-bought bobbin options. So most of them are hard plastic. That's these. And then we have some softer plastic here. So I'm just going to kind of go over what each one is and kind of let you know the price points of each. So we'll start over here. This is actually a bobbin for embroidery floss, and it's definitely meant for use in something that's going to sit on a box or sit flat somewhere. It's not really, so when you have this in use, the idea is you're going to tuck your yarn around those little catches there. The problem is when you're using this to hang off the back of a project, it's not going to stay put. So let's just get that out of the way. Skip the embroidery floss bobbins that look like this. The notches are not going to hold your yarn next to your project, and you're going to end up with a tangled mess. So that's kind of option number one. They're cheap. They're like, I don't know, 13 cents a piece, I think. And they usually come in like a set of 50 or something like that. So let's get that out of the way and skip that. So our next cheapest option is this guy here. So I got this off of Amazon. It was a set of 50, came in 5 different colors, so 10 of each color. They're about 19 cents each, so the set of 50 was under $10. And so you have the option of either winding the yarn around this way or around the center, so either through there, so it's going through the catch each time, or around here. So that's an option. And then there's this guy. He's kind of the same concept, where you can wind the yarn either way, but because the sides are straighter here, your risk of the yarn as you're working with it, if it loosens up, it will slide down the edges. So these two actually came together in a set. There were 6 of each size. These ran, let's see. So for the set, I got a set of 12, so 6 big, 6 little. They ended up being about 54 cents each. If you look closely, this one is basically the same exact thing as this boy. So feeling it, this one, the blue one, it's a little bit thicker, but barely. But you can see they're essentially the same shape, same concept. The boys are cheaper. The boy brand, that's BOYE, and you can get these. I've seen these at Walmart, and I know they have them at Hobby Lobby and Michael's and Joann's Fabric. These come in a set of 7, and that one, so they end up being about 46 cents each. So they're a little cheaper actually than these are kind of like the Amazon knockoff version, but the Amazon knockoff version was more expensive. So they all kind of work the same way. You wrap the yarn, you tuck it in through the catch, and then it just kind of hangs on your project, and then you can undo it from the catch. So I'll demonstrate those. This one is a Clover brand. And again, I know I've seen these at Walmart for sure, and I think I've seen them at Target as well. And then they have them at Hobby Lobby and Michael's and Joann Fabric. So I'll demonstrate how these work in just a second. And then these are, the brand is Bobbins, so Bob like the name, and then EEZ. And they're more of a flexible, they're kind of a pliable plastic, and that top flips up, and then you wrap the yarn around the center and then close it down, and it'll hold the yarn snug. So let me give you some demonstrations of how all these work. Now that we got that embroidery floss one out of the way, because just don't do that. All right, so here's my wound bobbins. So as I said, you can wind the yarn either way. you might be concerned that, for instance, if you look at the two big bobbins, the catch here is pretty narrow, where here it's pretty wide. But honestly, because of the way that your yarn is going to sit when it's hanging from your project, you don't need to really worry about it slipping out of the catch when it's hanging there, even though the catch is bigger. And in my mind, the benefit of the larger catch is that you can slip that yarn in and out without too much friction. Whereas when you have these, when you have this narrower catch, every time you're slipping the yarn in there, you're creating a lot of friction on the yarn. You can kind of feel it, and if you watch your yarn carefully, you'll see it'll get a little fuzzier. And so even though I would prefer to wind it this way and only use the catch when I'm wanting to stop the yarn and let it just dangle from my project, it is a little safer to wind the yarn this way, going through the catch each time, so that you don't have to worry about your yarn unraveling from your project as it's hanging there, if it gets looser. Okay, so that's kind of how they function. You can wind them either way, and then as you decide, okay, I want to use this much yarn, and then you work along your project, and maybe you didn't use quite that much, so you wrap it back up. And basically what you want to do is catch it so that it's hanging very close to the edge of your project. And then, so this clover one, same thing. So you're winding around the center on the clover, and then as you get to where you are done using the yarn, you're just going to catch it and it'll hang there. So basically a bunch of different options. They function just about the same way. Between these four, my biggest gripe is the pointy parts. So the size for these, I'm not really a fan of the bigger ones because they feel like they get in the way. I like a bobbin that hangs close to my project and doesn't really interfere and is there when I need it and out of the way when it's not. But all of these have pieces of, something that's sticking out, especially the Clover brand. I'm not a fan of that. And that's going to be more likely to catch your working yarn, to catch on itself, catch the yarn on itself, and just kind of, poke into your project, catch on the edge of your project. If you yank on it the wrong way, you might pull a stitch out. So I'm not really a huge fan of any of these options in terms of how they actually function when you're working with it close to your project. If you wanted to have it hanging way out, sitting, so I'm going to be working, but I'm going to pull off so much yarn that my bobbin's actually going to be sitting, on my lap here, and then I'm going to be working over here. Maybe they'd be fine. So just something to consider when you're thinking about bobbins. Those are all the store-bought options. Oh wait, actually let me show you the bobbies. There's drop my big one. Okay. So here are the bobbies wound. Okay. So you wind them very much like it's the same winding motion as you do for like a center pull ball, where you're just winding around. And then once you have your yarn wound in there, you can flip the flap down, and then it does hold it, like it's not going to go anywhere. Now, there's not so much friction that you couldn't pull out the yarn that you wanted to work with. So you wouldn't necessarily have to flip up the flap every time. It's just if you don't, you are going to have more friction on your yarn, and that will cause it to get fuzzy faster. So that's kind of an option. If I were going to work with a store-bought bobbin, this would absolutely be the one that I'd pick. Especially, so I'd probably use the smaller one for this project, just because I don't need a whole lot of bobbin yarn, and I love the way that it hangs really close to. You can hang it, like wind it so that it's super close to your project, so it's just right where you leave it. And then I also like that there's nothing to catch on here at all. It's just all smooth, out of the way, and yeah, they just very easy to use. This would definitely, so these are more expensive. These are, like I said, they're around $1 a piece. This is a little over $1 each. This was a little under $1 each. Oh, I forgot to tell you, the clover one, sorry, I mentioned prices and then I stopped. The clover one, this one's around $1 each as well. So So these would definitely be my option if I were buying something to use as a bobbin. So again, the brand is Bobbins, B-O-B-EEZ. So then there are a couple of things that you might find around the house that you could use as a bobbin. So my clothespin here, I have little bitty clothespins. We are actually using these for decorating some stuff, but you could totally use this to make a bobbin. You would wind the yarn around kind of between the spring and the, so you have the hole where the spring is and the hole where the pin is opening. So you're going to wind the yarn around the center between those two. And then your tail, you can actually just barely pop the clip open and tuck your tail in there. If you're really savvy, you can tuck your project in there and it'll just kind of hang. So you can get it to hang really close to your project. And then the only downsides are if you're not careful, it can kind of start to loosen on the other end and start to fall off. And again, it has pointy pieces, so that can catch your other yarn. And then you could also use a binder clip. So you could grab your yarn. You would wrap it obviously around where the the parts you pinch, the handles, meet the part of the clip. You'd wind around there and it'll hold your yarn in place, and then you can actually just pop the clip open a little bit and then just stick your tail in there to hold it. Well, from one direction. Let's see, I like that direction. So again, easy, quick, homemade option. The only thing is these metal parts around where the clip attaches, the silver attaches to the black, your yarn can get caught in there. So you would want to be very careful, especially this little ridge right here. Not just your bobbin yarn, but your working yarn could also get caught in there. So something to watch out for if you use something like a binder clip. And then the last homemade option, well, the second to last homemade option is a yarn butterfly. So yarn butterfly is just something that you hand wind, and I'll show you real quick. So you can do it a variety of ways. Some people like to, so you have to pinch your tail somewhere, but some people like to use their fingers and wind this way. And I didn't get my yarn pinched there. Let me try that again. So you're just winding in a figure 8, and you want to make sure that the yarn is stacking and not overlapping. So you kind of wind a few and then push it down, and then wind a few more. And then you would take once you get most of it wound, you're going to take your end and wind it around the middle. And tuck in your tail. So what I do is when I make my yarn butterfly, I wind it around the middle almost all the way, and then I stick a crochet hook in there. And when I wind it around one more time, then I can grab that tail and just kind of, I can pull it without, I can hold on to the end and then pull it tight around the center. So if I need to pull it out for some reason, I still have that tail there and there's not a knot. But then when you're working with your yarn butterfly, you can pull out one loop at a time each time you want to use it. So that works. It's free. It's easy to make. My only gripe with the yarn butterfly is that you can't put the yarn back in. So once you've pulled out, so every time you pull out one loop, you're actually pulling out an entire 8. So when I pull here, it's going to pull all the way back to the middle, so that whole strand. And so if you don't end up using that whole strand, you're going to have more of the butterfly hanging where it can wrap around your other yarn, get tangled in your needles. So I like to be able to keep my bobbin really close to my work. And so that's kind of why I don't normally use a yarn butterfly. So all that said, I will show you what I do use. And that is I make my own homemade bobbins out of free cardboard from shipping boxes. So I grab so I rip off an inside flap and I just kind of use it until it's gone. So I'll cut off a piece that's maybe about an 1.5 1.75 inches wide, something like that, and then maybe 2 inches long. And just cut off a piece. And then from there, I actually round the edges, the sides. So I'll cut around out of, I'll show you one that I've already cut. So I'll cut it in kind of an hourglass shape. So I'll cut around out of each long edge. And then I cut a notch in the top and the bottom. So the short edges each get a notch. And then I take my yarn that I want to use for my bobbin and I tuck the tail in one of those notches and kind of hold that there, and then just you wind around the center. And the concave, the little concave here will keep the yarn from slipping off, but it's not so pointy at the edges that it's going to catch on anything. And if you want, for a project like this, you don't even have to make the bobbin this big. You could make it closer to this size. So this is probably 1 inch by maybe 1.5 inches. If that, it's tiny, but you don't need very much bobbin yarn for this project. So you're just going to wind up your yarn around the center, and then when you get to the end, you're going to tuck your tail in the notch, and then each time you use it, you can just pull out a few wraps, and then work as so I like to pull out a few wraps and then tuck the tail back in, so that it's just caught there, so that I'm only using what's out of the bobbin, and then work across as much as I need to. And then when I'm done, whatever I haven't used, I can wrap back up, and then it'll sit really close to my work, and it'll just hang right next to my work and not get in the way. So that's another virtually free option that you can do, because you probably have a shipping box laying around somewhere. The other thing you could use like a tissue box, an empty tissue box. You could cut about the same shape out of it. I might double it up just so that you have a good thickness of cardboard to hold the yarn, and especially you want the kind of the double thickness is especially helpful to hold the tail in. And then let's see, what else you could use cardstock. So you could get a couple of pieces of cardstock and glue them together, and then let them dry, and then cut your shape out. And yeah, just you could use it from there. And so that's my preference. Out of all the bobbin options, this is the one that I choose to use. And I hope that's helpful. So we'll talk more about bobbins when we get to that part of Clue 6. So let's do that. Okay, so Clue 6. I'm actually going to begin at the end of the setup A row, and that's because I don't feel like the setup A row actually needs to be demonstrated. Just be aware, if you are working the blanket or the symmetrical blanket, you're going to work it differently. So that version, you purl 2 together at the beginning, like after the stitch marker, you purl 2 together, knit across into the last 2 stitches, and purl 2 together again. If you're working the shawl or symmetrical shawl, you're just going to purl the first stitch, knit across, purl the last stitch inside the markers. So when you come to the end of setup A is when you're actually going to join your bobbin yarn. So you want to have your bobbin, whatever you're using, pull out enough to do 10 stitches basically, and then secure your yarn. And then to work your edge stitches, you're going to work in the bobbin stitches. So I am doing the I-cord edge on my piece here. So if you are using, if you are doing a seed stitch edge, you're going to knit all 5 stitches with the bobbin yarn. Okay. If you are working the I-cord, then you're going to work it the exact same way you always work the I-cord, just with the bobbin yarn instead of your working yarn. So your working yarn is going to hang out here right next to the stitch marker, the dark color, or your color E. So just make sure you're working, since you're joining the bobbin, just make sure you're working toward the bobbin and not toward the tail, or you'll end up with the wrong part of the yarn where you need it to get started. So just work those edge stitches, and that was the end of setup A. So if you're working the seed stitch edge, again, all 5 of your stitches should be in the color F or the light color already, and they should all be knit. So if you're working the I-cord, you're just working your regular front, the right side stitches, and then at the beginning of setup B, you're again going to work your I-cord stitches. So if you're doing the seed stitch, knit the first stitch, don't slip it, and then do the purl knit for the other 4. But if you're working the I-cord, you're just going to work your I-cord the same way you do on the wrong side every time with the bobbin yarn. And this is the beginning of setup B. So just work your edge stitches, slip the marker, and then you're going to bring your bobbin. So anytime you're switching between yarns, so whether it's between your working yarn and the bobbin and the working yarn, or if you're over on the other edge and you're switching between the light colored edge stitches that we're going to begin over here and the dark colored yarn for the main part of the project, anytime you're switching between the yarns, you're always going to bring the yarn that you just worked with across the top to the left and bring the yarn that you want to begin working with across the bottom to the right. And then you're going to make sure that the last stitch that you worked with the yarn that you're switching back to is snug on the needle. And then you're going to just bring that yarn and work the next stitch. And it should have the same tension as it would be if you were just working another stitch with that yarn. Okay. At this point, what I like to do is I like to wrap my bobbin so that it sits really close to my work. Tuck in my tail and just let it hang out there so it's not hanging in the way. So it's out of the way and not catching on anything. And then we're just going to work setup B, which is, so we knit the first stitch already. And then the next stitch is going to be a purl 1E, which is the purl 1 elongated. So you're going to work it just like a regular purl stitch. Instead of bringing the yarn around the needle once, you're going to bring the yarn around the needle twice to make that stitch. And then you just want to make sure that both of those wraps around the needle end up on the shaft of your right needle after you make that. So you do the purl 1E, and then you're going to purl 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then we begin the repeat for this row. So the repeat is purl 1E. So again, wrap that yarn twice before you make the stitch. Purl 1, purl 1E, which is the purl 1 elongated. Purl 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That repeat again. Purl 1E, purl 1, purl 1E, purl 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And you're just going to work that same repeat all the way across. When you get to the end, you should have 2 stitches remaining. You're going to work the second to last stitch is going to be a purl 1E. And then the last stitch you'll knit. And then you'll slip your stitch marker. And then at this point, you're going to join in your light colored yarn. So this is your main ball of light colored yarn and not your bobbin. But we're going to begin the light colored stitches on this edge, beginning with your light colored ball here. So again, if you're working the seed stitch edge, you're going to purl all 5 stitches here. If you're working the I-cord edge, you're just going to work it like a normal I-cord at the end of the row, just with the light colored yarn. So because we have the tail of this yarn, the tail of the light colored yarn here, I didn't do anything to cross because when I go to weave in my ends, that's when I'm actually going to ensure that the tail of this yarn and the stitch of this yarn are connected well. Okay, so I wouldn't worry about that on this row. when we actually when we actually change from this to the edge stitches in upcoming rows, I will demonstrate that. So, all right, so beginning of row 1. So row 1 is worked with the light color. So the dark color is just going to hang out here at the stitch marker, and I am going to move it to the back. I should have moved it to the back, but I didn't, so I'll do that when I get there. So your edge stitches, because you're finishing up joining in the light color for the edge stitches here, if you're working the seed stitch edge, knit that first stitch and do the purl knit, purl knit. If you're doing the I-cord, then you want to just work the I-cord as normal with the light color. And that should have, you should have your light color joined in on both edges now. And whether you're working the seed stitch or the I-cord edge, you're just going to work your edges exactly as usual. You're just going to be switching between yarns sometimes. Okay, so at this point, we are going to be working with our color F. And so let's see, I've kind of got myself in a mess here because I didn't bring that yarn to the back in the first place. So let me do that now. Bring my yarn to the back. Slip my stitch marker. So I'm actually beginning row 1. All right. So at this point, I am just going to bring my working light colored yarn underneath my dark colored yarn, or your F under your E. And because I'm going to be working 4 rows with the light colored yarn. And so that is where this dark colored yarn is just going to get carried up. So I'm basically going to be sandwiching it. So it'll go, excuse me, it will go over at the beginning. And then when I come back across the next row, it's going to go under the light colored yarn. I'm going to bring the light colored yarn over the top of the dark colored yarn. So it'll be sandwiched in between. I'll show you that. Okay. So the beginning of row 1. We begin with a purl 1, and you just want to make sure that your stitch is snug on both sides. So your light colored yarn is snug over here, and your dark colored yarn is snug when you make this first stitch. And then the row begins after the purl 1. We do a slip 1 with yarn and back, and it's a drop wrap. And so basically when you go to slip the stitch from the left needle to the right needle, that extra wrap around the needle is just going to fall off, and it's just going to be a longer stitch. So that's all you need to do. Just slip the stitch over. The wrap should fall off all by itself. You don't need to do anything special. And then we begin our repeat, which is knit 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Slip 1 with yarn and back and drop the wrap. Knit 1. Slip 1 with yarn and back and drop the wrap. Let me do that again. Repeat. Knit 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Whoops. 5. And then slip 1 and drop the wrap. Slip with the yarn and back and drop the wrap. Knit 1. Slip 1 with yarn and back, drop the wrap. And then you should be, after you work all your repeats, so that's the end of the repeat, is slipping and dropping the wrap, and then you should have a total of 7 stitches remaining before the marker when you get to the end of your row, and you're going to knit 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Slip 1 and drop the wrap, again with the yarn and back, and then you're going to purl the last stitch and slip the stitch marker. Move your yarn to the back, and even though we're working with the light color, we are going to work all these edge stitches with the bobbin yarn. Okay, we don't want to have to carry unused yarn up this edge, and so we're always going to switch to the bobbin yarn when we come to this side. Let's see, let me get my tail out of the way for sure. Okay, so again, unwrap what you think you might need. So I try to unwrap for about 10 stitches so I can work both sides without having to unwrap again. So you're going to bring the yarn that you are sorry, you're going to bring the yarn that you finished working with across the top to the left, and the yarn that you want to begin working with across the bottom to the right before you make that first stitch, okay? And then you just want to make sure that your yarn that you're working with is snug to its last stitch. And that's going to prevent a gap in the where you're joining the yarn here. Okay, so you don't need to work it extra tight or anything. You just want to make sure that the yarn is snug to its last work stitch when you pick it up to work again. So work your edge stitches, however you're working your edge stitches. Turn, and this is row 2. So at the beginning of the row 2, you're working the edge stitches with the bobbin yarn, however you're working your edge stitches. Slip your stitch marker, and then the yarn that you're working with, so this is your bobbin yarn, is going to come across the top to the left. The yarn you want to pick up is going to come across the bottom to the right. Okay, so that's crossing right there. And then you want to snug to your last stitch and then work the first stitch. So the first stitch after the marker is a knit 1. And then on this row, so if you look at your needle, you're going to see dark stitches and light stitches. Okay, so the pattern is we're always going to slip the dark stitches and we're always going to purl the light stitches all the way across. So I will actually verbalize the pattern, but just keep that in mind. You're slipping after the first, you knit the first stitch and obviously the last stitch. So the stitches next to the marker get knit. But otherwise you're slipping with yarn in front, the dark stitches. So slip 1 with yarn in front, and then purling the light stitches. So purl 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then you begin the repeat. So slip 1 with yarn in front, purl 1, slip 1 with yarn in front, purl 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then you're going to repeat that. Slip 1 with yarn in front, purl 1, slip 1 with yarn in front, purl 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And you're going to do that all the way across until you only have 2 stitches remaining on the needle. You're going to slip 1 with yarn in front, and then bring the yarn to the back and knit the last stitch. Slip your stitch marker. And then, as I said, because the dark color, we had it above the light colored yarn before, when I work the edge this time, I'm actually going to bring the light color over the top of the dark yarn. Okay, so work your edge stitches. And that is the end of row 2. All right. So this is the beginning of row 3. So row 3, you're working your edge stitches with the light color. However you're working your edge stitches. Slip your stitch marker. And then again, because I went over the top of the dark colored yarn at the end of row 2, I'm going to bring the dark colored yarn above my light colored yarn to work the next stitch this time. Okay, so if you, before I do that, let me just show you. So you can see right here, hopefully, where the dark is sandwiched between, this is the row 1, and then the row 2, it's underneath the row 2. So it comes over the row 1 yarn and then under the row 2. So now it's going to go over row 3 again. Okay. So I'll bring it over and then come bring my yarn to the front. First stitch is purl 1. And again, I want you to look at your stitches. So you're going to be slipping with yarn in back, the dark stitches, and knitting the light stitches all the way until you get to the last stitch. So after you work that first purl 1, slip the dark with the yarn and back, and then knit the light colored stitches. We just do that all the way across. So again, I will verbalize the pattern, but that's just kind of a visual hint to read your stitches and know what to do next. So slip one with yarn and back, and then knit. So the pattern begins. So after you slip the first, purl the first stitch, slip the next stitch with yarn and back, and then the pattern begins, knit 5. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Slip one with yarn and back, knit 1, slip one with yarn and back. Repeat that. Knit 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Slip one with yarn and back, knit 1, slip one with yarn and back. And when you've done that, you should have 7 stitches remaining on the needle. So you will knit the last, you knit 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then slip the last dark color with yarn and back, and then purl the last stitch and slip the marker. And again, at the end of row 3, we're going to switch to our bobbin yarn. So our yarn that we just finished working with is going to come across the top to the left. Our bobbin yarn is going to come across the bottom to the right. I'm just going to pull out a little bit so I have enough to work with. And then I'm going to make sure I'm knitting snug to the previous stitch. Work the edge stitches with the bobbin. And that is the end of row 3. All right, so turn your work and begin row 4. And now I do have normally my yarn sits in a bag that turns every time I turn. I just give the bag a half turn every time I turn my work, but that doesn't work when my yarn is on my lap. So, all right. So at the beginning of row 4, we go ahead and finish working with the bobbin by working the edge stitches. So we work the edge stitches at the beginning of row 4 with the bobbin. And then we're going to bring let's slip the stitch marker. Bobbin comes across the top to the left, and then the working yarn comes across the bottom to the right to make the first stitch, and we're going to knit that. And then this is the scary part. This is row 4 where we're going to be dropping our stitches. Okay, so bring your yarn to the front, and then you are going to drop the first stitch. So we're always dropping these dark stitches, and we're going to be purling the light stitches. So drop that dark stitch off the needle, so you can either lift it off with your needle and drop it, or you can use your needle this way, or use a finger to push it off, but you're just going to let it hang out there on the front of the work and leave it. So slip the first stitch off or drop it, and then purl 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then drop. Let's see. So I'll make sure I start the repeat. So the repeat begins. Drop the stitch, purl 1, drop the stitch, purl 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Again, that repeat. Drop the stitch, purl 1, drop the stitch, purl 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You should have 2 stitches remaining. Drop the stitch, and then knit the last stitch. Slip your stitch marker. And then because the light colored yarn came under the dark last time, we're going to go over to work the edge stitches. And that is the end of row 4. Okay, so when we turn to row 5, we can see that all those stitches we dropped are just hanging out here on the front of the work. They're all still there. They haven't gone anywhere. You really don't have to worry about them falling out. If you really are, you can put like a locking stitch marker on each one, but it's really not necessary. They will hang out and wait for you to come get them. I promise. So the only stitch that you need to be a little careful about is this stitch at the very far right edge. Okay, so this is, it's only got one stitch between it and the tail of the working yarn. So if you pulled hard enough on this, you could possibly pull it out. So you don't want to pull too hard, but if, like, I can put a decent amount of tension on it, it's not going anywhere. So just be aware of that, and don't tug too hard on your dark colored yarn. So to begin row 5, we work the edge stitches with the light color, or your color F. And you slip your stitch marker. And then we're going to be switching from our light color to our dark color at this point. So we're going to bring the color we just worked with, the light color, color F, across and to the top. And we're going to bring our dark color across the bottom to the right. And we're just going to, again, we're going to work snug to the previous stitch, but we're not going to yank on this, okay, to work that first stitch, which is a purl 1. And then this is the row where we're actually going to be picking up those drop stitches. So we do a purl 1 and we slip one with yarn and back, and then we begin our repeat. So our repeat is knit 1 and then knit the drop stitch. So you always want to pick up the drop stitch that's closest, the furthest to the right. So sometimes it's going to be, if you look where I'm working, so this one is actually to the right of where I'm working. If I drop straight down, it's actually to the right of that. And the next stitch I pick up is going to be to the left. But I always want to make sure I'm picking up the stitch that's furthest to the right so you don't miss any, okay? So again, the repeat. Knit 1 and then knit the drop stitch. Knit 1, knit the drop stitch, and then we're going to wrap 3. So bring the yarn between the needles to the front, slide 3 stitches purlwise to the left needle, bring the yarn across the front and between the needles to the back, slide those 3 stitches purlwise back to the right needle, bring the yarn across the back and between the needles to the front again, slip those 3 stitches purlwise to the left needle and bring the yarn across the front and to the back between the needles again, and slip those 3 stitches purlwise back to the right needle. And that's the wrap. So you're wrapping 2 times. And then we're going to knit 1 and slip 3 with yarn and back. So that repeat again with less talking. Knit 1, knit the drop stitch, knit 1, knit the drop stitch, wrap 3, knit 1, slip 3 with yarn and back. So you're just going to work that repeat all the way to the end, and it says until you have 7 stitches left. So you're going to have 5 on the needles, and the other 2 are going to be these drop stitches down here, okay? So at the end of the row, you're going to knit 1, knit the drop stitch, knit 1, knit the drop stitch, wrap 3, oops. You know what, I messed up here. Pulled that stitch out. Hang on. Let me fix it. All right. Sorry, I'm in the middle of wrapping 3. Excuse the interlude. Then knit 1, slip 1 with yarn and back, and purl the last stitch. Slip your stitch marker, transition to your bobbin yarn. Remember, the dark yarn is we just worked with, it's gonna come across the top to the left. The bobbin yarn is gonna come across the bottom to the right. And then work your edge stitches with the bobbin yarn, making sure you're snug to your last work stitch. And that is the end of row 5. Turn your work. Row 6. Work your edge stitches with the bobbin. Slip your stitch marker, bring your bobbin across the top to the left, pick up your dark colored yarn from the bottom on the right, and we're going to work this first stitch, which is a knit 1. And then in this row, we're going to be doing the purl 1 elongated stitches again. And so if you look at your work, we're going to be slipping all the light colored stitches, and then the stitches that we work the purl 1 elongated in are actually going to be the first and third stitches of those wrap stitches. So you have this set of 5 dark colored stitches. We're going to purl 1 elongated, purl 1 elongated, purl 1. Okay, but I will again verbalize the pattern. So at the beginning of row 6, after you work the knit 1, you're going to slip 1 with yarn in front, and then we're going to purl 1, and then we're going to purl 1 elongated, wrapping twice, making sure both wraps end up on the shaft of your needle. Do that again, purl 1 elongated, and then purl 1, and then, purl 1, and then this is the beginning of our repeat. So we slip 3 with yarn in front, and then we do a purl 1 elongated, do that again, purl 1 elongated, and purl 1. So that repeat again, slip 3 with yarn in front, purl 1 elongated, purl 1 elongated, purl 1. At this point, you should have 2 stitches remaining before the marker, and you're going to slip 1 with yarn and back, and then knit the last one. Slip your stitch marker, and bring your yarn to the back, and here we're going to cross. So we're going to bring the dark colored yarn, your color E, to the top and the left, and your light colored yarn, or your color F, is going to come across the bottom to the right, and then we're going to make our edge stitches snug to the previous stitch to ensure that there's no gap there. And that is the end of row 6. And you can see when you turn to begin row 7 that we've got the beginning of our little crisscross here with the wraps. Okay. So row 7, we're going to be working the majority of row 7. So we're going to be working with the light colored yarn again. So this is where we begin sandwiching our dark color yarn at the marker to carry it up. So with the light colored yarn, work your edge stitches. Again, this is row 7. Slip your stitch marker. And then because we did the catch with the yarn, when we switched between the dark and the light, last time. It's already caught there, but I am going to bring it over the top of my light colored yarn just to keep the pattern, and bring my light colored yarn to the front to work the first stitch, which is a purl 1. And then we work a knit 1. And then the pattern, or the repeat for this row, hang on, let me get my, there we go. Repeat for this row is knit 1, slip the, knit 1, and then slip 1 with yarn in back, where you're going to drop the wrap off the needle again, knit 1, slip 1 with yarn in back and drop the wrap, and then you're going to knit 4. So 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, that repeat again, knit 1, slip 1 with yarn in back, dropping the wrap, knit 1, slip 1 with yarn in back, dropping the wrap, knit 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then at the end of the row, you're going to have 7 stitches left, but also you're going to, it's going to look like more because you have 2 wrap stitches on there, so just don't miscount those. So you're going to knit 1, slip 1 in with yarn in back, dropping the wrap, knit 1, slip 1 with yarn in back, dropping the wrap, knit 2, and then purl the last stitch. Slip your stitch marker, and then we're going to transition back to the bobbin yarn. Bring your working yarn that you just finished with, top to the left, and your bobbin yarn across the bottom to the right. Bobbin yarn doesn't want to go into its notch. There we go. All right, and then make sure you work your first edge stitch snug to the previous stitch. And that is the end of row 7. All right. Turn. Row 8. So at the beginning of row 8, we're working our edge stitches with the bobbin yarn. Slip your stitch marker, bring your bobbin across the top to the left, pick up your other yarn, your working yarn, from the bottom right to make the first stitch, and make that first stitch, it's a knit stitch, snug to the previous stitch. And you can drop your bobbin. And then row 8, after that knit 1, we work a purl 2. And then we are going to slip 1 with yarn in front, purl 1, slip 1 with yarn in front, purl 1. And then if you look at your work, you're going to be purling the light colored stitches and slipping with yarn in front the dark colored stitches all the way across. But the repeat is as follows: purl 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, slip 1 with yarn in front, purl 1, slip 1 with yarn in front, purl 1. That repeat again, purl 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, slip 1 with yarn in front, purl 1, slip 1 with yarn in front, purl 1. And then when you get to the end of the row and you have 2 stitches remaining, you're going to purl the second to last one, knit the last one, slip your stitch marker, and then because I came under the dark colored yarn at the beginning of the previous row, I'm going to go over the dark colored yarn to make my edge stitches at the end of this row. So it'll end up sandwiched in between them. right, turn your work to work row 9. At the beginning of row 9, work your edge stitches. Slip your stitch marker. And then I'm going to come underneath my dark color to make my first stitch, which is a purl 1. And then for this row, we're going to be knitting the light colored stitches and slipping the dark colored stitches. So after we work the purl 1, we're going to do a knit 1, and then our repeat is knit 1, slip 1 with yarn and back, knit 1, slip 1 with yarn and back, knit 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. That repeat again. Knit 1, slip 1 with yarn and back, knit 1, slip 1 with yarn and back, knit 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. When you finished all the repeats, you'll have 7 stitches remaining, and you're going to knit 1, slip 1 with yarn and back, knit 1, slip 1 with yarn and back, knit 2, and then purl the last stitch. Slip your edge marker, switch to your bobbin yarn. Remember, the working yarn comes across the top to the left, bobbin yarn comes across the bottom to the right. Get my yarn in the notch. All right, and then we're working our edge stitches snug to the previous stitch. And that's the end of row 9. Turn our work. And row 10. We're going to work the edge stitches with the bobbin. Slip the stitch marker, and then the bobbin comes across the top to the left, and then our main color, our main working yarn, either light color, color F, comes across the bottom to the right, and we're going to knit that first stitch snug to its previous stitch, and then you can wind up your bobbin if you need to and get it out of the way. And then continuing with row 10, so row 10 is again, we're going to drop stitches, so we're going to be purling the light colored stitches and dropping the dark colored stitches all the way across. I will, again, verbalize the pattern, but so after knit 1, you purl 2, and then you're going to drop stitch, purl 1, drop a stitch, purl 1. And then our repeat for this row, purl 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, drop the stitch, purl 1, drop the stitch, purl 1. Again, that repeat, purl 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, drop the stitch, purl 1, drop the stitch, purl 1. You should have 2 stitches remaining before the marker, and you're going to purl 1 and then knit the last one, and then slip your stitch marker. And because I came over the top of the dark color when I did the previous row, I'm going to go over, or because the dark color came over the light color when I did the previous row, the light color is going to go over the dark color to make the edge stitches this time. And that's the end of row 10. And again, you can see the stitches that we've dropped are just hanging out here on the front, waiting to be worked. They're not going anywhere. So we begin row 11. So with row 11, we begin with the light color for the edge stitches. Slip the stitch marker. And then we are going to begin working with our dark colored yarn. So I'm going to bring my light color across the top to the left and bring my dark color across the bottom to the right to make my first stitch. And I'm just going to make it snug to its previous stitch. And that first stitch is a purl 1. And then we are going to immediately
Pick up and knit the first dropped stitch.
So again, that's going to be the first one to the right, but in this case, it's going to be to the left of where I'm working. So pick up and knit that first drop stitch. And then we begin our repeat. So our repeat is knit 1, slip 3 with yarn and back, knit 1, knit a drop stitch, knit 1, knit a drop stitch, wrap 3. Okay, that repeat again. Knit 1, slip 3 with yarn and back, knit 1, knit drop stitch, knit 1, knit the drop stitch, wrap 3, and you're just going to repeat that all the way across until you have 7 stitches remaining. And remember that the 7 stitches include the drop stitch. So you'll have 6 on the needles and 1 still down here. So knit 1, slip 3 with yarn and back, knit 1, knit the drop stitch, and then purl the last stitch. You're going to slip your stitch marker and then transition to the bobbin yarn. Bring your dark yarn across the top to the left, bring your bobbin yarn across the bottom to the right, and work the edge stitches with the bobbin yarn snug to the previous stitch. And that is the end of row 11. Turn and work row 12A. So 12A and 12B are just slightly different. So when we work 12A, we're going to be working the purl 1 elongated stitch. And when we work 12B, we're just going to be purling. So other than that, we're still going to be slipping the light colored stitches and purling the dark colored stitches. It's just we're going to be working the, it's essentially the stitch that we picked up is going to be the stitch that ends up getting the elongated stitch. But you're always, whether you're working just the 12B where you're just purling across, or if you're working 12A where you're working the purl 1 elongated, you're always slipping the light colored stitches and working the dark colored stitches. So we begin row 12A with our bobbin yarn to work the edge. Slip our stitch marker, bring the bobbin yarn across the top to the left, pick up our dark color, our color E, across the bottom to the right, and make that first stitch, which is a knit 1, snug to its previous stitch. And then we are going to work a purl 1 elongated, purl 1, then we're going to slip 3 with yarn in front and purl 1, and this begins our repeat. So the repeat is purl 1 elongated, purl 1, purl 1 elongated, purl 1, slip 3 with yarn in front, and then purl 1. So that repeat again, purl 1 elongated, purl 1, purl 1 elongated, purl 1, slip 3 with yarn in front, purl 1. And then when we get to the end of the row, we should have 2 stitches remaining. We're going to purl 1 elongated and knit the last stitch. And then slip our stitch marker. And then we're going to transition again. We're going to bring the dark yarn to the left across the top and the light yarn to the right across the bottom. And then we're going to work our first stitch snug to the previous stitch of the light color to work our edge stitches. And that is the end of row 12A. So as I said again, when you work 12B, the only difference is you're just going to be purling the dark color, all the dark, so knit the first and last stitch in between the markers, but otherwise you're going to be purling all the dark colored stitches and knitting or slipping with yarn in front all the light colored stitches. And that's all you do differently to work 12B. And if you are working the symmetrical versions, so that would be the symmetrical shawl or the symmetrical blanket, you don't end on a 12, you actually end on a, so you work through row 5. The last time you work a repeat, last time you repeat the rows, you're going to end with a row 5, and then you're going to look for the modified row 6, which is under the symmetrical blanket instructions. And modified row 6 is basically the same thing, where you're going to be knit the first stitch, and then you're going to be purling the dark color and slipping with yarn in front the light color stitches all the way across. They're just going to be in a different order than they are here at the end of row 12, or at the end of, well, technically for row 11, because you're ending on a row 5 instead of a row 11. So when you work modified row 6, then you're going to jump back and work row 13, which is just inside the marker. You're going to purl the first stitch, knit across, purl the last stitch. So make sure you, if you're doing the symmetrical versions, that you do the modification there. Otherwise, that is the end of clue 6. When you are all done with your clue 6, here is what you're going to have. Is this lovely pattern. I really love this pattern. When I first saw this pattern, I saw the to drop the stitch instruction and went, no, never mind. No, not doing that. But then I kept coming back to it. I kept looking at it. I was like, I really love the way that looks. And so I tested it out, and it turns out that dropping those stitches is not nearly as terrifying as I thought it was going to be. And so what I did want to point out is, so in addition to, this is what you're going to get when you're finished with your, sorry, I've got my yarn is caught around the end of my project here. When you are finished with your clue 6, so if you notice from clue 5 to clue 6, it kind of bows in a little bit. All right, so that's got that little curve in. That is actually what it's supposed to do. So when you work your swatch, if it's not slightly narrower than your clue 5, then you probably need to go down a needle size. But you should be able to very gently stretch it to the same width. Okay, so you shouldn't have to do barely any work at all. It should stretch to the exact same width as your clue 5. And that's how you know you've got the right tension, the right right needle size for this clue is that you can very gently stretch it to the correct dimensions. Okay, so the other thing I wanted to show you is when you work when you're doing the transition between the bobbin to the working yarn, or the working yarn to the bobbin, or the dark color to the light color over on the other edge, if you're doing it correctly, you shouldn't have a big gap here. So you can kind of pull out the stitch, but when you block this, you're actually going to block it inside the edge so that the edge is straight and you're not actually pulling the edge away from the project. So you're going to block straight inside the edge. What you don't want is a big gap, and I'm actually going to throw a picture up here so you can see what you don't want to happen when you're working those edge stitches. So if it looks like this, then you need to correct your tension on your edge stitch where you're transitioning from the working yarn to the bobbin, from the bobbin to the working yarn, or from the dark color to the light color on the right side edge. So I hope that's helpful. And if there's anything that I didn't show well, or that you would like to see slowed down or up close more, or something like that, just let me know. I'm happy to shoot that and put it up for you. So just let me know if that's something that I can do. Thanks a lot.